All right, we have started. Welcome back, everybody, to Where the Elders Roamed. I am Tex. This is Leper. I am in a hotel,
Hi.
and I'm recording on dog shit internet with a dog shit audio setup.
Hi.
So I'm sorry.
I'm trying a feature of a program I use to have a green screen effect without an actual green screen, so I look like a smudgy blobby mess.
It looks like a sludgy blob with an excellent shirt. And you guys will notice that in there, I don't think Leper would have noticed this because he's talking and can't hear himself. The audio kind of broke up. So that might happen. Um,
Yeah.
but we got the message.
Welcome.
It's the
Yeah.
nature of life sometimes. But I've been experimenting and having a little bit of fun with some setup stuff. And unfortunately, I can't really use any of that because I am on my shitty laptop from 5 years ago or less. I don't know. It's an old laptop. Anyways, point being, I'm traveling. So the setup's a little janky. But nonetheless, today's episode, Leper, we're going to kind of go into this a little bit laissez faire, a little carpe diem on this motherfucker. Last week, 2 weeks ago, our first episode, we talked about just kind of getting started, how to start a team, and some of our
Yep.
guidance about that. And had some pretty good feedback. A lot of people really enjoyed it. Had a number of people asking if they could be on the podcast. And this is going to be a blanket statement. I don't know. Uh, right
Yeah.
now, we're kind of just getting our feet under ourselves, trying to get a few episodes in, and we want to get some of the big, broad stroke stuff. We want to get starting a team, coaching, practice, things like that. And that's a little prelude to what I want us to talk about today. But as we get into some more specifics, and as we start getting into some more recursive information, maybe diving deeper into some topics we might have already covered, I think it would be really excellent to start to bring on some people. Once Leper and I have our foundation, we can more effectively facilitate having guests on board. So we're definitely open to it.
Also, just each person you add into this, the scheduling gets very difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we were talking a little bit about it a little bit beforehand. But one of the hard parts too is we don't do this to like listen to ourselves. I mean, there is an ego element of it. We like to, make
Yeah.
ourselves feel good by making content and
And
stuff.
and of
But
course you enjoy having people listen to what you have to say, but like you have to have something to say.
yeah, and we try our best to
Like,
have something to say. And if there's a topic that you're interested in discussing, let's talk about that. We're not
yeah,
really here to talk about just anything in particular, I guess. I mean, we
right.
kind of are. I don't know.
Maybe.
If you, we'll.
Essentially, like we would like, if you are interested in being on the podcast, that you have a point of view and more to talk about rather than just kind of like reading a book report.
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
trying to be rude about saying it
Well,
that way, but
one of the
like
best parts about this community,
deeper ideas and being willing to participate in the discussion.
one of the best parts about this community is how eager everyone actually is to get involved. And there's a lot of stuff to talk about, and I think everyone has opinions and thoughts about stuff. So, want to reach out to myself or Leper, and we can have some conversations. But we're just kind of level setting that a little bit. But let's talk about today's topic.
Yep.
I had
What is
intended.
today's topic, Tex?
That's a great question. I had intended to have a little bit more offline conversation about this. You like that corporate
Yeah, but
terminology
you
there?
were traveling all week, so that didn't
Um,
happen.
I was traveling all last week, and then I was working this week, getting settled in down in Texas. Now I'm back in Iowa again because fuck me. But
Yeah.
either ways, also adult adult content here. But no, the topic I wanted us to dive into is practice. So you've gone last week. We talked about going through and setting up a team. You've got a schedule. You've got someone to help manage the team. You got 5 players. What's next, right? It's a pretty broad topic, though. I don't think we're going to tackle all of it today. I would like to try to see the first part of the conversation today is how can you break this topic, this concept of practice for an amateur esports team. So we're not talking about pros necessarily, but I think there's something to learn up and down, both going both ways in that relationship. But generally speaking, amateur teams, we've been built, we've got a manager, we've got a schedule. What does practice look like? What are some of the subtopics in there? That's the first thing I want to talk about. What are some of the subtopics? How do we break that down?
So let's start with the first big question is, should your team be practicing?
So, my first instinct. Sorry, I'm trying to find my notepad here. My first instinct is to say kind of yes, but maybe your question's a little more nuanced than that.
Yeah, so like it all depends on your purpose and your goals. To go back to last week, a lot of it is like,
What's the
what are
ethos?
we setting out to do? What is our founding statement of our team, right? What is our
Exactly.
core philosophy? there are many teams and there are some players out there that thrive basically on this attitude of let's show up and play.
I remember Feathers. You know Feathers, of
Yeah,
course. I
yeah.
think most of the community
Feathers is a
knows
great
it.
one for this.
He did,
Feathers is not a big one for a huge amount of practice. Like
but has had a
typically,
lot of success in the gold scene. Like,
right.
yeah,
And that's and he and I have talked about how something that I'll get into later, which is that there most teams in at least IBS and gold, right? Like I think that the number goes up as we go higher, have a finite number of hours that they can survive. And that if you burn it all practicing and scrimming, you're spending your lifespan
this
on stuff that is not going to be results.
exactly. So you're touching on
So
something core.
so to make it a little more or less there, the point of practice or lack of practice is to accomplish alignment, getting everybody on the same page. That's the main point of practice.
That's the main takeaway. I feel like maybe we just needed to make 1 2-hour episode where we just said the same thing for 120 minutes, and it's basically, what are you trying to do? Do that, right? In
Yeah.
more effective words here, it's like, what is the goal
What
of
are
the
you trying
team?
to
What's the
do?
mentality? What's the
Do that.
ethos? What's all
Right.
this stuff? And then just make sure you're always referencing that with every little thing you do, right? When your scripts, well, you hit something that's really important with your practice schedule, game schedule, all this stuff. Burnout is huge. One of the things that I
Yeah.
personally, as an org owner, am generally pretty averse to is when I have players that are on multiple teams. So like it's never anything personal, but it almost
So
always is a disadvantage to my team. Usually it's a disadvantage to so one player on 2 teams. Okay. One player on 3
Yeah.
teams, disadvantage for all 3 teams. I want,
I
for
would
me,
even
one player,
go
one
so
team.
far as to say one player on 2 teams. I
I
want to be clear in this context. In this context, I'm specifically referring to starting roles.
Correct. Yeah. Yep. Substitutes is a totally different thing. And that's another topic maybe, is like when you're building a team and doing practices and stuff, that's a more nuanced topic we can talk about later, is how does
Yep.
substitutes get involved? What's their relationship to the roster? Because a lot of times they're just there. They don't get treated
And there
with the
are no
same
hard
respect.
answers here.
And
There are no hard answers. When we're talking about practice, this is one of those things where like people that have been out and about and done their stuff, like we want to know what you think and what you feel and what has worked for you and what hasn't worked for you.
There's
'Cause
a lot
everybody's
of
different.
everyone's different, and everyone has different. It's interesting, especially depending on the rank too. If you've been silver, then gold, then platinum, or above, right? I think about people like Cole, where
Yep.
it's like, what has his experience been like across the board? What was more valuable at lower and higher ranks and competitive in the amateur scene? Because I would argue that at once it's very different, and at the end of the day, kind of always going to be the same. But let's talk about, so when we're talking about practice, there's
Yep.
the ethos, like what are you trying to accomplish as a team?
Yep.
There's another element to me that's like individual versus group practice, which dips into
Okay.
scrims and drills and solo
This
teams, things
is
like that.
I will argue and fight with people. This is my philosophy at this point in time after having done this for like 3.5 years. If you are only playing in team practice or only playing with your team in flex, norms, whatever, you are not improving as an individual. You are only improving at playing with your team. Now, people will say, and this is the internet, and this is this community, and people will take that to mean, oh, Leper's saying that it is impossible for one to increase their rank and improve their individual skill while playing with the team. That is not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that to the.
I think the key
yes,
point
there
is
are
the
benefits of
exclusivity.
playing the game will make you better as a general statement. However, playing in the environment in a competitive context with your teammates, whether that's one person that you're duoing with, like if you're duoing bot support, mid jungle, heck, even mid top, whatever the heck it is, you are primarily improving your skills at winning in organized play.
Mhm.
You are not getting better at reading the game, really. You are not getting better at your individual laning skill. You are focused just subconsciously at winning that game at all costs.
There's a
And
s
that really gets in the way of improving as an individual.
there's a slider in my mind, or there's, like, sliders that you kinda control. It's like, as you add more people to the group, right, and have a more controlled setting, like, across the game, right,
Yep.
the custom games, right? The match-made games that you have. As you slide that more complex, you have to reduce the influence and focus that you can give yourself and that people can give you, whether it's a coach or whatever, right? It's a balancing act. There's 100% capacity, and if you're at 90% on the slider for up here, this has to be at 10%, and vice versa, right? So as you go and play solo queue, there's less factors that are controlled external to yourself, and all of a sudden, all of your energy and focus is exclusively on you, and the outcome is so far out of your hands, and it doesn't really matter that like you have to just focus on you. And so there's value. This is where it goes back to the ethos, right? You got to, if you're looking at practice and trying to grow yourself, like grow your skill sets and grow the team and all these other elements, you've got to, it's a tool, it's tools, right? Hammer for a nail and then a screwdriver for a screw. Pick the right tool for the right time and balance it, right? You're not going to just build a house with hammers and nails and 2x4s. That's it. You've got a whole collection of tools you need to use. You got to lay foundation. You got to get concrete. You got to get a mixer. You got to all these things, right? All these tools help build the house. Can't ignore any of them, but you also can't only use. You have to be proportional and fair, and use your guiding light as your direction here. One of the things I know, that there's a I don't know if there's a stigma necessarily, but I do want to reference traditional sports here. And this is one of the things I think I was talking about in Discord with you earlier this week or last
Yep.
week, where it's like, why is it in esports, specifically League of Legends, it feels like we have this strong fixation with scrims, like just the concept of scrims. And I kind of want to focus going forward maybe
So do
on
you want me
scrims.
to be really mean and nasty to people in the amateur esports scene?
Let me get my thought out real quick.
Okay.
I don't want to undercut it because I love it when you get mean, Leper. I love it. But I just wanted to ask, and then lead this into your thing. Where it's like, why are we so stuck on scrims and almost nothing else, right? You hear all like I've watched a lot of Mark Z's videos the last couple of months after Worlds, during and after Worlds and stuff, and there's always this conversation about scrim culture, scrim culture. It's like, why is it not practice culture? Scrim is one element. When I played sports as a high schooler and my first year of college, didn't really play much. But, most of my life, almost my whole life growing up, all the way through being 18, 19 years old, I played soccer. I got lucky. I got to go to England and stuff like that. I got to do a lot of really cool stuff. And all along the way, a scrim was like 1 to 5% of the non game time training that we did. We did drills, we did conditioning, we did set plays, we did all these things. That was 95% of the stuff that we did outside of the game. And so I'm just so confused about why that doesn't translate to League of Legends.
So I can't speak to the pro level, right? That's a different
Totally
status.
different.
The general answer that most people are going to give is that League of Legends does not have the tools to do so. Secondly, that League of Legends is such a complex game that so many of these situations and events and moments
Mhm.
are not
Like, you can't
replicable.
isolate set pieces as well
You
with League of
cannot
Legends.
isolate in League of Legends. Is basically the
Is that how
general
you
idea.
feel, or is that like, do you agree with that? Because I have some thoughts, but I want to hear what you have to say about
So
that
okay,
argument.
I do, at least as far as like every team that I've ever been on, I do more drills. I spend more time in practice tool, right, than probably every teammate I have ever had.
It again
There
depends
are
on
some
ethos. Sorry.
right there's some things that you can do, right, but you're not really going to necessarily be able to sit there and go, we're going to just go into like a custom game with against nobody,
Mhm.
right, and just practice our warding. Like you can't do that. Like there's things that you can do. Like I do the Lux Spot drill. Like I'll sit there and I will like do do things with like Victor lasers. Like I'll do
Yeah.
things to like get my mechanics going so that like there's more muscle memory there come the actual execution in the game. But so much of my personal process is playing a game and then reviewing, playing a game
Right.
and reviewing, playing a game and reviewing, and trying to do better in the next game. And I think that that's the idea of scrims,
Hmm.
and that the reason that at least at the pro level, the scrim is the be all end all is that you play against another team that is organized. You're not going to
Right.
get that benefit against playing with another team. Interesting tangent, and I'm not saying this. I'm not anywhere near qualified to say anything about the pro scene because I know nothing about it. It was
Sure.
interesting to me with all of the LS drama
Hmm.
that happened earlier this year in the LCS
Oh
that
yeah.
Sven, the C9 support who has been playing for fucking ever, talked
Lifetime.
about in an interview about how one of the things that he really enjoyed and was different about LS than every other coach that he has had is that LS would have an idea and he would make them play that idea over and over and over again
Hmm.
until they got it and would not give up on the idea until they had actually like executed on it, which is
Right.
something that's very different in the normal scrim culture.
Well, and one of the challenges for us to try to accommodate, they have the economy of time, and even then they
Yep.
burn out, right? Like there is a huge issue of, at least in NA, the burnout issue. I feel like that's been cited a lot this year for a lot of pros in NA about this whole discussion, and that's a whole other tangent. But for us at the amateur level, the idea of drill the thing, fail, seek the
It doesn't
failure, and
exist.
it doesn't exist. And there
It
isn't a
doesn't
lot of,
exist.
and the execution. I agree to a degree that League of Legends is really difficult to skinny down to passing drills, set pieces,
Right.
things like that. But I don't think it's impossible. I think it just
That
takes a
being
little bit of
said,
legwork and a little bit of
there are ways
creativity.
to do it.
Yeah.
There's ways to do it, right? Like the most drilled team I have ever played on. It's also the worst team I've ever played on. Was Donut Shop Chocolate, and we spent like a good month that all we did in our practice games was we went into a normal game. With the intent that we are going to
Mhm.
forfeit at 15 minutes, and we are just going to focus on learning how to dive towers. That
That's
we are
interesting. So you hit on something earlier too about like how constructed 5v5 scrims. That's the term I was looking for, was
yeah,
constructed games, right? There's constructed and non-constructed games.
yep,
Constructed 5v5 scrims have this predication to them that's like you're out there to win and play like a real game. And the
yes.
challenge with that is you
So
can't really adjust
this
that
was what
without
I was
setting
going to
different
say earlier.
expectations.
I think that for a lot of IBS and gold players, scrims mean just as much as an official game.
Mhm.
That there is no differentiation in the player brain of what the purpose is, what their focus is, and what they're there to do.
The
That
amount of
they want to
times.
they want to draft so
Mhm.
I cannot have a conversation about good scrim or bad scrim or what the purpose of scrim is. Some people just want to go some of the logic that I hear is that people want to practice drafting and figure out what people are going to ban against them and like
That's another thing you
practice
could break down
scouting and all
into
of
a
this, and it's
drill.
like why this is the thing that we can drill. Why is this the thing for
Mhm.
scrim? Like
It's when you put all the
there
pieces together, the individual
right.
parts become a whole, and it's the whole, right? What the common denominator is what you care about. So, like the common denominator of all these pieces, drafting, first 15 minutes, second 15 minutes, in game, all these things, right? Like that all is a part of the discussion, and the thing is, all the things you're putting all of your energy across all these elements. What's the common denominator? The whole game and the outcome, right? So then your energy becomes on the single thing that you can focus on, which is the outcome, which is winning. And at the same time, you have 5 of your players, right? And you have 5 of some randoms or people you kind of know or whatever, but you're agreeing to play a scrim. And how are you going to have the nuanced conversation like hours before scheduling a scrim of like, hey, we kind of want to spend 3 hours just fucking around with this idea. Can you? It takes. There's so many moving parts. This is the issue with
The
scrims
amount
to
of
accomplish what you
issues
want. It's
I
moving
have ever
parts.
had of like dealing with a scrim, No, I'm not even going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about a drill. Okay,
Okay.
and this is to me it summarizes the issue. So, Revolution Anarchy, we did a lot of internal laning drills
Hmm.
where we would try to replicate, like, we would do it with, like, mid jungle top on both sides of the map, right? And we would have 6 people, right? 2 junglers, 2 tops, 2 mids. And we would try to simulate
Hmm.
as realistically as possible lane phase. And it was incredibly hard for my teammates to not treat it just as like a drill and do things that they would not do in an actual game because of the context, right? Like, just as an example, right? Because, and this is going to pick on Valor and Yes Parade, right? It took probably 2 months of doing these drills to get them to not sit in the like far bot bush in
Hmm.
order to like cheese at level 1
Yeah.
because they
It's
wanted to win. They wanted to win. They wanted to be the stronger bot lane. They wanted to do these things and they couldn't like get out of that mindset
yeah.
to like thinking of it like practice. And that to me is a lot of the issue with practice
It's
in general, is that a lot of people don't have the idea of what practice is
so
for.
to loop this back around, we've hit on a lot of different topics, but I think talking about like a unifying theme here, it's the ethos, right? And this is the shout out to all the players that might watch and listen, to all the admins, coaches, managers, owners, whatever your involvement is with this community. This is kind of my thing to advocate to you guys, where it's like divorce yourself from outcomes, right? Like is not your goal is to win on game day. Everything before that is to lose as effectively and often as possible. So your goal as Valor and Yes Parade as examples there, right? Like me, I'm not a coach, and I'm not the best at League of Legends.
Yeah.
But one of the things I would maybe think about is like, all right, let's race to level 2. I want you guys to get to level 2 in different circumstances, and we're going to drill each circumstance 100 times, 10 times, 5 times, whatever. And then your goal is not to do everything possible in this, like, you have a narrow lane of things to do. It's a simulation. I'm going to tell you exactly how you need to do it, and you need to get to level 2 first. And you're not going to cheese bush, whatever, right? Set that you set that outcome, but it's the process of getting there that is so important, because as you go through and fail and fail and fail, you're going to get used to them. You're going to get that muscle memory. You can get that nuance down, and then all of a sudden that's going to apply all day, every day. Like you can this to bring it back in to my point. Divorce yourself from trying to win everything and become infatuated with, get obsessed with losing. Get out there, try very specific things. Don't worry if you succeed or not. Try it, and try it right. Try it straight down the middle. Don't try to cheese it, or do cheese it. Try the cheese. Try the cheese 100 times, right? And then apply it 100 times, and then fuck it up 100 times. That's my ethos to you guys. Whatever it is, define it. Try it. Don't worry about, as you're practicing, don't worry about trying to do it right, or no, don't worry about trying to win or succeed. Do it and let yourself fail and learn how to fail, because that's what practice is about. Practice is not about winning. When I did sports my whole life growing up and stuff like that, and then through work, right? I apply this to my job. We work in iterations. My software teams, we deliver software ideally every 2 weeks or so, and in those iterations, we look at it and we say, what did we do wrong? Like what went wrong? Well, how can we grow from this? And it's not a bad thing. One of the things that I hope that I have and can continue to instill in my engineers, my players in Revolution, my stakeholders at work, all these things, right? Is that when we fail, I don't care the fact that we failed. We all understand what sucks about failing. But what can we gain from this, right? How can we get excited about failure? That's what you got to do with practice. Scrim becomes difficult, to get back to the point there. Scrim becomes difficult to focus on the journey because you have so many moving parts. It becomes so complicated. And you lose
Yep.
track of anything in particular because you have to deal with everything. And that's what game day is for. Game day is where you put it all together. You guys got to work on losing up until that point.
So to get back to our original question, which
Yes.
is what is practice, right? Right. What is practice, right?
Mhm.
Practice, quite simply, is for your team, whatever that may be, getting all of your players ready for game day.
Getting ready for game. It is not to simulate game day. It's not to simulate game
Correct.
day.
It's not to
It is to
simulate.
get
It's
you
not
ready.
to.
It's however you need to do that, and it's gonna change over time. It's gonna. You also gotta look at your players too, right? You gotta
Different
look at.
teams and different players are going to be different, right?
Mhm.
I have encountered teams that I feel would have benefited more from less scrims and just taking time each week to just sit in the same call and play solo queue,
I bet you,
right?
yeah.
Like,
I bet you some teams could benefit. I bet you there's a team out there right now, that could just do an ARAM one day every week. Or sorry, they could just play like 6 ARAMs in a day every week as their practice. And that could work for them because it might be accenting and
yep.
attenuating them to the part of their process and their team dynamic that on game day suffers. Or maybe it's leaning into their strengths, whatever it may be. It doesn't matter. There is no moral. This is one of the things too, is like there's no moral, there's no virtue to any one way of practicing.
So first I want to talk. So let's talk about what are scrims good for.
Yeah. We've shit on them enough. Let's talk about what's
Scrims to
valuable.
me, like I don't think that you should start with scrims, right? Like if you are doing scrims right off the bat, I think it's a waste of time.
Mhm.
I think that you as a team owner, player, whatever, need to establish some baseline things first before you get the most out of scrims. But like, what do we like to play, right? Like, how do we want to play? Because if scrim is for testing things
Yeah.
out and identifying problems, right?
And there's a lot of moving parts. You don't go
And there's a
into a
lot of moving
scrim.
parts,
You've
right?
got
Like,
five on the other side of the rift. You got 5 other human beings and a coach and an admin and a whole other org probably
yep.
that are coming in trying to get a certain expectation experience. If you haven't played just like 20 normal games or 10 flex games or whatever together yet, don't even touch. Really try to avoid playing scrims. Right? Play normals together in any combination. Get comfortable with each other. Get a feel for how each other play, so that you can move on to having some functionality with your scrims.
Right. So like some examples of problems that typically come up. One, right? Especially if you do multiple scrims, like I don't think that one scrim day a week is a bad thing overall. Do particular players continually lose lane? Right? That's a common problem, right?
That's a
Are
good thing
we
about scrims is you can start to identify some of those individual
that's
things.
exactly it. Your scrims is a good area to identify problems, and then you can adjust your practice to
Because
deal
it's
with it. So,
so broad, right? The scope of a scrim is so broad, but the depth to which you can get with any one thing is so shallow. It gives you little ticks. Be like, okay, top lane laning phase, X, Y, and
yep,
Z. Let's go observe this in a 1-on-1 or 2-on-2 kind of setting and see how that plays out and what we can focus on. It gives you some
absolutely.
handholds to really start diving deep, but you got to spin it off from that. Sorry to
And
interrupt
you
you.
also get to well, I'm just like another thing that really common is nobody's talking,
Mhm.
right? So if
That's
like
a
you don't have good communication and you don't have a good communication process, right? Like you can identify that in a
Mhm.
script, work on it in normals or flex or on another practice day, and then go back, right? Like scrim is in my mind, again, we're not concerned about the outcome, right?
right.
You can always
You're
do better.
gathering
I don't give a
data.
shit who
Practice
you
is
are. You
gathering
can
data, man.
always do better. But like, regardless of outcome, we can start looking at, okay, did we start talking more? Did we plan our objectives better?
Mhm.
Right? Whatever it may be, the scrim is the environment that we can actually test these things that we have been working on out.
I really
And it all,
It's a great way to gather a lot of data relatively
yep.
quickly. And
And
as and go ahead.
if you're only after result of the scrim, if you're
That's
only
not
after your
data.
score line, then a scrim's a waste of time. You're not
Right.
getting anything actually out of it.
What yeah, it's like if
Now,
all you were
I
trying to
will
achieve, like, why couldn't this
okay,
just have been
I am
game day?
going to amend this statement, okay? This is biased by Tex and me and our philosophies on team building.
That's
There
true.
are
That's
some
true.
people out there, and this is not to fault them. I don't agree with it. I don't think it is effective. However, there are some people out there that their desire is to have the best individual players that they possibly can in a role, and that they basically are constantly using scrims as a metric of whether or not that player is good enough. And if that player is not good enough, they will find another
To
player. And
spin off
that
that a
is
little
a
bit
yeah,
one thing about scrimming more often than not is it talking about preparing for game day, it gets you ready for game day. It normalizes The
Yep.
5v5, like, especially if you lean into the fact that we kinda get fixated on winning. If you say, "Guys, no holds barred, everything the only thing that matters here is winning," because, like, maybe the team's issue is they get nervous. Maybe they don't know how to close out games, right?
Yeah.
And maybe a
Or they're
scrim is a
afraid
gr
of making a mistake.
yeah, and maybe and the best way this is a philosophy of mine, a life philosophy of mine is, "You don't know a mile till you walked it." That's not my phrase. I picked it up from somewhere.
Yep.
But it rings true for a lot of things. The best way to deal with something that's makes you anxious, scared, nervous, whatever, is to give it a try. In a whether it's in a smaller controlled environment or a really intense version with mitigated risk, whatever makes you at least a little bit able to do it, go walk that mile. Walk a foot. If you can walk a foot, extrapolate that out 5,280 times, that's a mile. And go try it.
Right.
Right. But the point is you don't know until you try it. And if your team is anxious, and repetition makes it easier, right? Every once you do it once, it gets easier. Once you do it twice, a lot easier, exponentially so every time you do it. So if your team
That
is
brings me
got game day
to a
jitters,
great point after you're done.
scrims help navigate that, especially if you say, guys, this is a game. This is everything right here. Put it all on the line. There nothing else matters. You need to win. And if that and that's just going to help work through some of those elements. It's all about the tool and how you want to leverage it. What were you going to say?
One of the things that practice is really useful for, not so much scrims. Scrims again is the test of your your hypothesis, if you want to
Hmm.
put it that way, right? That
Oh, that's a good way
one
to
of
put
the things that practice is really useful for is identifying what your job as an individual player is.
it. Hmm.
And so everybody on every team, regardless of your role, has a job. I don't care what position you play. If you play support on 5 different teams, your job in each team is different because you have 4 different players on every single one of those teams. And one of the ways that practice can be really useful is figuring out what your job and your responsibilities as a member of that team is. And one of the ways that things tend to go wrong in scrims is people trying to take on more than just their job. And that creates a lot of self-doubt. That
Because
creates a lot of friction. It makes you play really stiff,
mhm,
right? So, like, practice and scrims is a lot of way to start basically teaching a team that if everybody is doing their job, you have good results.
yeah.
It's a lot of the issues happen when the jobs aren't being done because you can't do the job of someone else.
And you shouldn't have to, and you should be able to trust the other person. This okay,
Yep.
so this is I wanna put a pin in that thought about trust because
Okay.
I have a personal philosophy that if I'm on a team, I need to inherently trust the other people on my team, even if
Yes.
very blatantly in my mind, I don't, right? Like, if it's like, "Man, this person always does this," it's almost my responsibility as a player on this team that I need to expect, trust, and continue to I can't if I distrust that my top laner is gonna is dragon fight 4v5 tops on the top side, and the goal is not to split push. We need him to TP flank on a ward. I need to trust he's gonna do that. I need to play like he's gonna do what our team and coach and everything has agreed on as our strategy for these situations. I because if I start deviating because I think he's going to deviate, and maybe he does 9 times out of 10. Maybe he does, or my mid laner doesn't roam, or whatever happens, right? Even if they do it 9 times out of 10, me deviating is just as much of a problem. It adds more complexity to a situation and adds more chaos to a situation. But that is a whole other element that's not necessarily related to practice. There's a topic I want us to talk about as an extension of coaching and the involvement coaches have, which I think is a good sequel to this topic, because I think players, as much as coaches, have definitive roles in this kind of meta level of the team, right? Coach versus players, or coach versus player versus team kind of thing. But we could talk
We'll
about that a
talk
little bit
about
later.
coaching another day because coaches complicate things, and I have strong opinions about how
Yeah.
a lot of coaches do
Well,
more
a lot
harm
of the
than good.
stuff that we're talking about right now does relate directly to the value of a coach on a team. And one of the things that in 2022 Revolution has been trying to explore is how do you do coaching right in the amateur scene? But we could talk about that later. When it comes to
Yep.
scrims, it's one of the things to consider as well in all of the stuff we've talked about. And then it's going to be tough for us to create a synopsis at the end of this because we've kind of gone all over the place.
Oh yeah.
But one of the things I want to go back to a point earlier is burnout. Um, there's this line from one of my favorite books, and it's one character telling another. Basically, it's like, oh, I want to paraphrase terribly here, but it's if there's actions to take, act. If there's information to gather, gather it. And after all that, if there's nothing left to do, go to sleep. Um, sometimes more practice, you've hit a threshold, right? Sometimes more time, more practice just gives more stress, anxiety, burnout, doesn't actually get you what you need. And in traditional sports, recovery is as important as activity, as drills. A good night's sleep, a day off, active recovery, whatever it is just as important as getting out onto the pitch and doing the drills and playing the matches. I think the same philosophy applies. And it's
So
a little easier to get away with here too.
you and I both experienced this last split. That your team goes through stages. And one of those stages is you guys being angry and
Yeah.
pissed at each other. And this happens on every team.
I remember
I'm
telling
not-
Anarchy that at the beginning, like when it was
Yep.
like Wingman and I before Zillan joined. It's like, all right,
Right.
guys, it's the classic forming, norming, storming, performing, right?
Yep.
And I know it sounds so cliche for anyone who's heard it.
It really
If
does.
you've heard it once, you've heard it 100 times is the problem. But it's
If
accurate.
you don't know this, because I don't think that everybody knows this, right? Your groups, whatever group it is, right? That's your personal relationships, right? Your work
Everything.
relationships, formal team sort of stuff.
Any group of 2 or more
Class
people will go through this
will go
in
through this
their
stage.
relationship.
Yeah. Forming, right? We are forming relationships.
You're getting to know
right?
each other.
This is
Like
introduction, we're
small
getting to know
talk.
each
How does
other.
this? Yeah, all the things. Who are you? Where'd you come from? That's forming. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah. What's the next one? I can always forget the next one.
No worries. Norming. So norming is where you start to get into habits. You start to fall into, which is a good thing, normal behaviors, in jokes, ways of communicating. It's one way to notice that you're kind of in that stage of relationship on a team, whatever, is like awkward silences kind of dissipate, right? It's where the team kind of is starting to get comfortable with each other, but haven't necessarily faced a lot of stress.
But things are fun typically here, right? Things just you start to fall into a pattern of the way that things are going to
The
be.
comfort in the norming phase causes a lot of stress in the next phase, which is storming, which is where you start falling under pressure, like with teams and stuff or groups, but like teams especially, you start performing and you start losing, right? You start getting into games, and you lose, and then tensions rise. You start storming, and storming is basically literally just people are getting at each other's throats, right? You're getting upset with each other. You're learning a new type of communication that you guys need to practice as a group. And that's oftentimes where teams just fall apart because they don't recognize it's one of those things where you got to recognize that the tension is not you got to take out the morals and the virtues of things sometimes and just kind of look at what they are. Storming is just there's communication issues. That is the core of it. There's some communication dissonance between the members involved that's causing tension. And if you can make it audible, clear, through whatever strategies that you can try to the people in your environment, whether one-on-one or in the group, that, hey, I'm seeing this tension. That's the first step almost every time. Is like, if you're storming, someone, whether it's the person responsible, manager, coach, whatever, or player, doesn't matter, or the whole group, needs to call out the fact that you feel that tension. Disarm the anxiety that comes with that tension. Because then, by acknowledging it's there, you can start talking about it and be like, and it's never accusatory. Everyone is involved in equal parts in the storming phase. Like, we all are a part of this team, and we all have a joint responsibility to learn how to communicate with each other. Because, go ahead.
Most teams I have seen, now I have no experience really above plat, but most teams that I have seen never make it through this phase.
Yeah. And it's not easy.
There's also some people that have very, very great success, right, by keeping their teams constantly in norming. That every time they hit storming, they make a player replacement. And they bring in somebody new in order to try to keep the good vibes going. And that they keep trying to maintain this honeymoon stage throughout the rest of the season, right? It's why you see some people and some people will feel called out by this, and everybody I think will have a few different names in their head when they say this, have a lot of success by making roster changes 2 weeks before the playoffs.
Yep.
Um,
That's not that.
that being said, the best teams, especially in IBS and Gold that I have ever seen, go beyond this.
Mhm. And the next step after, so you
And
forming,
I want to be
norming.
clear, the winning the league doesn't make you the best teams, right?
Right.
Sometimes there's
Circumstances.
the
It's
team.
winning is more complex than just being the best.
Yeah,
You want, and that is not to diminish winning a league. That is an incredible feat of
not at
tenacity,
all.
endurance, cohesion, and being among the best, right? If not the best. But it's not always. You can't just. It's just. We were talking about this a little bit before with some other work-related stuff, but like you can't distill down one factor. If you make the winning the only metric, you lose the whole picture, right? You can't. You lose the
Yep.
painting. You forest for the trees. The next step after storming is performing. And every team goes through cycles. Performing is you guys now have all the tools. You will get upset at each other. You will have in jokes, and you will recycle through the phases. But performing is that step where you have the tools. You are equipped and practiced at communication and being able to navigate those problems. So when they do come up, you get past them, and you continue to play and progress and succeed. One of the things about this, and I think this whole process: forming, norming, storming, performing. Like I said, for those who've heard this before, I know you've heard it 100,000 times. I'm sorry to say it again, but one of the challenge, but this is integral to practice and integral to the role of the coach, which we can talk about later. But it practice is not just mechanics. It's squishy. It's soft. It's all these things, right? There's the technical stuff, getting good at the game, getting draft down, getting champion pools, champion depth or skill or whatever. But there's also the squishy stuff because like I know we're all gamers XD, but like to be in the competitive environment, we have to develop social skills. We don't have to have them, but we have to develop certain sociability to be able to succeed um, continuously, to be able to succeed, have an enduring level of success. And one of the things that I encourage everyone to do with a team that's just starting and a team that's trying to understand practice is preempt. You could winning, success, happy path. That's easy, man. You don't have to prepare for that really, because that's easy. It's easy to be on a team that's winning. It's hard
Yes, it
to be
is.
on a team that isn't. And I know how ridiculous that sounds, but the most important thing to do.
A lot of teams, right, will have tremendous success because they are winning. They're winning their scrims, right? They're just stomping that whatever it may be. A thing that is common, not always, a thing that is common with those sorts of teams is that they will lose and just absolutely crumble. Like they'll lose one game. I have even seen this happen off of close series, not even like lost.
They didn't get stomped.
Like, series that have won. Yeah. It was just close. And they collapse mentally, right? Because it's not what it was before. And they have no internal structure of how to deal with this.
Every team, every player, if you're a player or a manager or a coach or whatever, but if you're a player especially and no one else has had this conversation, sit down with your team right now and be like, at your next practice, next get together, whatever, and be like, guys, how do you, I think I asked you guys this, Leper, what's your tilt language? When you're tilted, what does that manifest as? Like, how does that look? And then the next step is to ask, how do you like to receive feedback or be communicated with when you are tilted? Because one of the things that that prolongs the storming phase is not communicating in ways that the other person can hear. Everyone, we've got this is my analogy. Imagine you got front brain, back brain, right? Front brain filters into the back brain's where all the ideas come from. And so if I'm fucking pissed at Leper, right? I've got the raw emotions and ideas and all the information that I perceive to have in my back brain. I got to shovel that through a funnel that is my front brain. It's got to go through that. First off, information fidelity is lost. And it's got to go through your front brain, get processed and digested to how Leper thinks in his back brain. And like all along the way, my message, if I'm communicating in a way that Leopard doesn't communicate effectively, he's going to take a totally different meaning. This is where like passive aggressivism oftentimes becomes an issue just in social situations where someone I grew up in a household where passive aggressivism is kind of instilled right in one side of the family for generations. And I hate it so much. And me and my dad don't do well with it. Both sides of the family, but me and my dad don't do well with it. And we get kind of snippy about it. And then when I would approach it, family members would be like, that's not what I meant at all. Like genuinely didn't think they meant it that way. I was reading it one way and they were communicating it another. And so I had to adjust how I read their information, what they were telling me. And on a team, it's the prerogative of the whole team to have that conversation with each other. It's like, how do I know when you're tilted? And then if you are tilted, how can I most effectively communicate with you so we can be continuing to strive towards our success? And maybe I can even help you navigate your tilt. But you've got to know this. You have to have that hard conversation and do it early. Do it when you're like forming and
No,
norming.
so much of why we collectively are involved and play in competitive League of Legends
Mm.
is the things of talking and communicating. Like, I know I have heard every single person who has ever played competitive say something to the effect of, "Oh my fucking god, I hate playing solo queue. I hate these brain dead monkeys that I am playing with. Why can't I be with my team where I can actually talk to them verbally and like we come up with a game plan or whatever, right?" It's so much of what we like about playing competitive is being on the same page
Yeah.
with other people and existing in that environment where everybody is moving towards that same goal.
It is
And
viscerally satisfying.
practice is the place where you develop those skills. You
Mhm.
develop the skills that separate the competitive game we love from solo queue.
Yep.
It's what makes it different from hitting find match and joining Blue Water League or
Yeah.
joining Aegis or whatever, right? Like that is what separates the two.
So this is our
And I
this
think that if you are coming into this in the if I play in a team, I'm just gonna get better. You're lying to yourself.
you've got to put in work to get better. Like you've got to
Right.
be focused. You got to pick a thing and try and practice ways at improve. You have to practice that thing. Um, I I, I know we got to wrap up here a little bit soon. I just want to kind of put a little cap on some
Absolutely.
of the bullet points here. So off the top, are and I mean this might be at the end of every single episode is say when you're trying to organize a practice, a single day of practice, whatever it is, what is the ethos of the team? What is this team's mentality? What is their goal as a team? What is our vision? And how are we accomplishing that? Next thing
Yep.
down is practice is not just scrims. Scrims are valuable, but practice is all about using the right tool for the right need. Scrims, notably, are a great way to gather data and to accomplish certain things, but it's all about the context in which you're doing these practices. So make sure that you know what you're doing and why you're doing it and have a defined like we're trying to get done with. This is what we want to get out of this.
Practice without intent is not particularly useful.
Mhm.
There's if you don't have an intent or purpose for what you are doing, is it any different than five people just playing flex or norms together for fun?
Not really.
Is it practice? Right? Like by the nature of calling it practice, you should have some
It's
intent behind it.
intent. You're practicing for what? It's a verb. Um, and then one of the last things on there is it's not just technical, it's soft skills as well. You're going to go through phases as a team, and it's really important to be able to practice communication. And how do you effectively practice communication? It's by asking questions of each other early and often and in considerate ways. Be considerate to each other and empathetic.
What we've also found, and as we've talked about here, is that scrims are the place to test yourself and test the skills that you have learned in practice in a higher stress, game replicable environment.
Yep.
And it's a good way to identify problems and refine your practice.
Refined. I love that. I love that so much. That's good. Well, any last thoughts, Leopard, before we wrap it up here?
I don't. I think practice is important. I think that the more common issue with practice is lack of intent and too much.
Yep.
I've seen some teams out there in especially in the IBS space this offseason that wanted to start practicing 3 or 4 nights a week in October
Oh,
for
man.
leagues that start in February, right?
Oh, dude.
And that's a lot of time, and you're gonna burn out, and guess what? Those teams were looking for new players by November,
Yep. Yep.
right? So, like, you need to gauge what your players are able to do and so on. Practice also is not necessarily just team. Practice is what you do on your own time as an individual to improve your individual skills.
We will have future episodes where we'll dive into, I think we can come up with a list and we'll dive into specific elements, solo queue, different
Absolutely.
types of
And
drills.
every team is different. Some teams are going to have in-game issues in terms of like performance, like in terms of like laning, in terms of like moving around. Other teams are going to have communication issues. Whatever it is, the goal of practice is to figure out those issues
And be on the same page.
and be on the same page.
Well,
It
folks,
doesn't matter if you're to be kind of crazy if your top laner loses every game, right? Like if you're
yeah,
down
yeah.
0-4 every lane phase, that's okay if you work that into your game plan, if that is practice, if you know how to deal with that. That's all that this is.
I
And
wanna call us a wrap on that one there,
yeah,
Leper. Thank you everyone for listening. This has been Where the Elders Roamed, episode 2, discussing practice in broad strokes.
yep.
Next episode coming out hopefully next Sunday, we'll be discussing coaching. I think is kind of the next
I think coaching
organic
is the next topic.
I think that's the next organic topic. I will be reposting in the Revolution Discord the link to the survey. Please fill it out with any sorts of questions you'd like us to answer. This week, we don't have a lot of time to answer any questions, but next week, we'll get right back at it. I've been Tex. This has been Leper. Thank you guys for joining, and you have a wonderful evening.